Huh. I'm not even clicked on the game, and, it's responding. Alright. Alright. We're back to Hijikata. Let's see where we go today. December 1867. Whoa. As the order to begin imperial restoration came, Satsuma and Choshu troops started occupying the city of Kyoto. At the same time, members and affiliates of the Tokugawa shogunate were being removed from the imperial palace, and eventually Kyoto altogether. They, as expected, did not take this lightly. In response, the shogunate's military forces were beginning to march from Edo to Kyoto. As tensions rose from the approaching shogunate armies, the Satsuma and Choshu were preparing their own forces for a hostile confrontation. The situation was growing increasingly frenzied. As the shogunate scrambled to call upon their remaining allies, the Shinsengumi received an order to come from the Fushimi magistrate. Having all of their men and armaments gathered in, the Fushimi magistrate enabled the shogunate to act in the event of an emergency. So off we went. On one such day, during the commotion, the bad news was delivered to the Fushimi magistrate. There had been no witnesses and the culprit escaped unseen. Their motives could only be guessed. Nagakura got a crew of warriors together, and they all headed towards the location where Kondo-san was shot. Kondo-san's gunshot wound was on his right shoulder. The bullet pierced clean through him, shattering the bone, which required more treatment than I could have given him at the compound. I was sweeping up the common room when... Oh, Sanan-san. Did you have any business here? If you're going to use this room, I'll leave. Huh? His words perplexed me, so I felt a little anxious. Just then, the most prominent Shinsengumi captains began filing into the common room. What were they about to discuss? My anxiety was starting to grow stronger. Which in another timeline, we've already seen how this plays out. And in his hands was an object, wrapped in a fine cloth, that he slowly unwrapped before all of us. As I saw what was inside of his hands, I gasped and clasped my hands over my mouth.
々は新選組幹部としてこの薬の研究を受け入れ、今まで実験を続けてきたことについて最後まで責任を取らなくてはなりません。何より近藤さんのように怪我をして剣を振るえなくなったり、最悪の場合命を落とすことだってあり得るのです。この薬はそんな時必ずや役に立ってくれるはずです。
三男さん、あんた俺たちを薬の実験道具にしようってのか。
今の状況で幹部大使の誰か一人でも欠けては困ると言っているだけですよ。
ふざけんじゃねえ。俺はこんな薬に頼ってまで生きながらえたくはねえぜ。
Nagakura barked his indignation to Sana-san's proposal, and he stormed off.
お守り代わりってところかね。この薬を飲むような状況にならないことを祈りたいが。
Inoue spoke softly as his fingers pinched the vial and held it close to his eyes.
お借りします。まあ、使うことはねえと思うが、一応受け取っとくぜ。
Both Saito and Harada grabbed a vial, and they slipped it into respective pockets. Up until now, Hijikata-san had crossed his arms and silently observed Sanan-san's speech.
責任を取らなきゃならねえ。まあ、確かにその通りだよな。
His eyes looked troubled, but he reached for the serum and slipped it into his pocket as well.
それでは、今夜はこれで解散とします。私の行為が無にならないよう祈っていますよ。
After Sanan-san had finished, the captains all bowed and left the room, and Sanan-san turned towards me.
雪村君、分かっていると思いますが、今夜のことは他の大使には決して口外しないように。いいですね。
Timidly, I nodded my head, and Sanan-san waited for a second before nodding silently and leaving the room. What could I do? The serum created by my father was now in the hands of the captains. I shuddered at the thought of them drinking it.
局長を襲った刺客の正体はまだつかめないのか。どうせ薩長の奴らに決まってるぜ。卑怯な真似を。
Ever since the attack on Kondo-san, the atmosphere at the Fushimi Magistrate's office had been tense, to say the least. I felt it increase as I stepped into the meeting room, carrying tea for the captains. Here's your tea.
ありがとうな。そこに置いといてくれ。
I seemed to have walked in on a serious discussion. All around the room were tense, drawn faces.
で、今後どうするつもりなんだ。薩摩の奴らは政権返上だけじゃ飽き足らず、徳川家が持ってる領地も何もかも返せって言ってやがるんだろ。どう考えても戦を始めるための口実作りとしか思えねえぜ。今のうちに戦う準備を進めておくに越したことはね
だろうな。奴らは年若い天使様を担ぎ上げて我が物顔で朝廷に出入りしている。で、そいつらとの戦の準備をどうするかだな。
三男さんは羅刹隊の増強を主張してらっしゃるようですが。
A memory of the other day came back to me. Sanan-san offered the water of life to all of the captains, and they accepted it.
俺は反対だ。これからの戦は不逞老子を取り締まってた頃とは違う。敵味方入り乱れて戦う中で連中の手綱をうまく取れるとは思えねえ。戦力にはなるが危険すぎるぜ。
だな。何より人道的に見て問題があるだろ
では他にどんな策がある？他の者の意見に異を唱えるのであれば代案を出すべきだと思うか。
だから俺らだって考えてんだろ。そんなすぐいい案が出たら苦労しねえよ。
副長はどう思われます？
Hijikata-san furrowed his brow and frowned.
とりあえずもう少し考えさせてくれ。敵の出方を見なきゃ何とも言えないし、幕府側の意向もあるから。
Kondo-san's injury had put everyone on edge, especially with a war inching closer day by day. What was going to become of the Shinsengumi, as well as the Fury Corps? That night, I had visited Okita's room to check up on his condition. Ah! Good evening, Okita. How are you feeling? Huh? Heisuke? I arrived to find that Heisuke had also come to visit Okita to pass the time. Yay!
お？どうしたんだ？こんな夜遅くに。
What do you mean?
若い女の子が夜中に男の部屋に来るのはどうかと思うぜ。
Really? Heisuke, you're smarter than that. You know Okita and I aren't, you know.
まあ確かにそうか。
Boy, it took you this long, really?
お前の場合、そういう色っぽい話にはとことん縁がなさそうだもんな。
Hey, what do you mean?
どういう意味もこういう意味も。なあ。
何か用事があったんじゃないの？
Their personalities are so much swapped. I really expect that kind of line on Heisuke out of Okita. What the fuck? Though, I mean, Okita is kind of a bit of a grumpy bitch right now, I feel.
じゃなきゃこんな夜中にわざわざここに来たりしないよね。
Oh, I came to check up on you, Okita. So are you feeling okay? Is there anything you want to eat?
あるわけないでしょ、この状況で。
I suppose.
用事はそれだけ？だったらもう戻ったら。
God fucking damn it, Okita. No, Okita had been acting more aggressively than I had anticipated, so it kind of took me aback, but I had to bring up the subject on my mind. Do you guys know that, Sanan-san wants to augment the Fury Corps?
ああ、そりゃな。
まあ三男さんの立場だったらそう考えるのも無理はないんじゃない？羅刹隊だってある程度の人数がいないと戦で手柄を立てようがないし、結局肝心な時に役に立たないってことになれば切り捨てられるのは目に見えてるしね。
Cut off? No.
はね、何を驚いてるの？もしかして役に立たない人たちに無駄飯を食べさせてあげるほど慈悲深いとでも思ってる？まあ君を4年も養ってあげてはいたけど、それはたまたまってことを忘れちゃ困るな。
I suppose you have a point. I'm sorry.
掃除、いくらなんでも言い過ぎだろ。
The thing is, Soji is always a jackass! The fuck you want him to be besides that?
こいつを今まで豚書に閉じ込めてたのは俺たちの事情なんだし。
Heisuke interjected with stern words, and Okita sneered in his direction. Clearly unmoved by Heisuke's defense in my favor, Okita kept harping on about his grievances.
にしても土方さんは何をしてるんだろうね。近藤さんをあんな目に遭わせた奴らをさっさと切りに行けばいいのに。僕がこんな体じゃなきゃすぐにでも敵を取りに行くんだけど。
Okita's bed rest was clearly rankling him. After all, he'd known Kondo-san for a long time, long before the beginning of the Shinsengumi in Edo. What do you think, Heisuke?
俺はそうだな。落ち水を飲むって決めたのは俺だけど、この先どうなっちまうのか不安がねえわけじゃねえよ。三男さんはもっと羅刹隊の人数を増やすべきだって言ってるけどな。そうしなきゃこれからの戦に勝てないって。でもそのために大気違反もしてねえ大使に落ち水を飲ませるってのは。
Ah. He was so unlike the Heisuke I remembered. So stern and cold. I couldn't help but feel sad too.
でも三男さんが何を言っても最終的にどうするかを決める権限は土方さんにあるからね。
だよな。ただ羅刹隊はもう存在しちまってるわけだし、臭いものに蓋をし続けるのも限度があるよな。まあ羅刹隊を強力な兵力と割り切って活用するのも間違いではないんじゃない？剣としてはそこそこ使えるからね。
Perhaps we could use the Furies as a weapon. They might help us to win the coming war. Their strength would be an undeniable military asset. But once the war was over, what would become of them? I was afraid to ask that question, because I feared I already knew the answer. The next day, an unexpected visitor arrived. Oh!
こんにちは。しばらくぶりね。
Sen, why are you here? And Kimigiku's here too.
局長殿に用があってまいりました。取り次いでいただけますか？
Ah. Kondo-san isn't in good enough shape to speak to anyone. Perhaps Hijikata-san?
じゃあ、土方さんでいいわ。
I don't remember this part, I'll be fair. Alright, please come inside. I wonder what kind of business they could have had to discuss that brought them to us at such a late hour. I felt uneasy as we headed towards Hijikata-san, who was at the magistrate.
意外な客があったもんだな。本来ここは部外者は立ち入り禁止なんだが、今日は一体何の用だ？
ごめんなさい。どうしても今日しなければならない話があったものですから。
Ah, I'll go make some tea.
いえ、話が終わればすぐおいとまするからお茶はいらないわ。それよりあなたもここにいて。あなたにも聞いておいてほしい話だから。
Hi. What did she have to say that was so important? And that might be something I should hear? I sat down in a corner and listened intently.
話というのは他でもありません。羅刹のことなんです。
When he heard the word Furies, I saw his face twitch.
単刀直入に伺いますが、一体いつまで羅刹をお使いになるつもりですか？
いつまでとは。
これだけ長い間彼らを刺激しているんですもの。わかるでしょ？羅刹は失敗作です。幕府側もそう認めています。あれはあなたたちの手に余るもの。これ以上羅刹にも鬼にも関わるべきではありません。
失敗かどうかは使ってる俺たちが決めることじゃねえのか。こっちでも幕府とは別の方法で羅刹に改良を加えてるところだ。 あんたらにごちゃごちゃ言われる筋合いはねえよ。
ではあなたたち新選組の羅刹が見回りと称して辻斬りをしているのはご存知ですか？
Ooh. For a split second, his cold mask dropped, and I saw genuine confusion and dismay on his face. Then it was gone, and he was cold and composed once again.
そりゃどこで掴んだ情報だ。
それに関してはお答えする必要はないと思いますわ。ただ信頼できる筋から得たとだけ言っておきます。羅刹化して血に狂ってしまう症状は全く改善されていないご様子。都の治安を守るのがあなた方の役目ではなかったかしら。そんな方々が血を得るために罪のない民を切るなんて本末転倒もいいところですわ。ことが公になって民心が離れる前に羅刹たちを処分すべきです。
Kimigiku's logic was sound. Hijikata had no counter-argument. Everyone in the room had fallen silent. But was it true? Were the Furies indeed cutting people down in the street for the thrill of killing? If the Fury Corps was disbanded, then Sanan-san and Heisuke would... Every one of us waited for Hijikata-san's answer with bated breath. My heart roared in my ears.
とりあえずこの話はここで保留ってことにして、もう一つの要件に移らせてください。
With this, she turned and looked at me.
ここを出て私たちと一緒に来ない？
Ah, round two of this question. What?
前にも同じことを言ったけど、あの時と今じゃ状況が変わっちゃってるでしょ。
近いうちに今日は戦場になります。逃げ出すのなら今のうちですわ。
I knew war was coming, but to hear the truth presented so badly was jarring.
お願い、私たちと一緒に来てちょうだい。ここの人たちじゃ戦になった時、あなたを守りきれるとは思えないの。
おい、そりゃどういう意味だ。俺たちが非力だって言いてえのか。
耳が痛いかもしれないけど事実でしょ。もし風間がここに来たら、あなたたち彼女を守れるんですか？もしかしたら薩摩や長州の兵たちと戦っている間に来てしまうかもしれないんですよ。それに彼女はあなたたちとは違う。鬼なんですから、同族の私たちと共に来るべきです。私たちなら彼女を安全な場所で守り抜くことができますから。
She turned from Hijikata-san to face me once again.
ね、一緒に行きましょう。あなたが私たちと共に来てくれれば、この人たちも戦いに専念できるわ。
Her words hit like blows, but she spoke the truth. War would soon break out, and perhaps remaining with the Shinsengumi would be dangerous for me and for them. I would be useless in war. I was no soldier. Even so, I wanted to stay. I looked over at Hijikata-san, hoping he might give me an answer. He only furrowed his brow and looked the other way, saying nothing. What was I to do? I should leave. I was sure Sen was right and I should leave, but the words just couldn't come. In truth, I didn't want to leave. I hope that maybe someday all of the madness and war would end, and then I could be a human being, not a demon.
どうして黙ってるの？さっきも言った通り、あなたはここを出た方が。
Her voice was kind, and I knew she had only my best interests at heart, but I still couldn't bring myself to respond. Hijikata-san, of course, saw straight through me.
出て行きたくねえんだ。だったら余計なことを考える必要はねえ。ここにいりゃいい。
But is that really okay? If Kazuma came after me again...
何度も同じことを言わせるな。この二人と一緒に行ったところで風間に居場所を嗅ぎつけられねえ保証はねえんだ。奴は俺たち新選組にとっても敵だ。同じ敵を相手にするんなら一箇所に固まってた方が効率がいいじゃねえか。
He was as gruff as ever, but it wasn't hard to understand what he was trying to say. So, I can stay?
愚問だ。迷惑だと思ってたらとっくに放り出してる。
Relief flooded out across my body. Thank you so much. With war set to break out at any time, the Shinsengumi was changing. I didn't know how useful I could be to them once battle was begun. Wait, what? I don't know how useful I could be to them once battle begun. But even so, Hijikata-san told me it was okay to stay. I'm sorry. It was very nice of you to offer, though.
いいのよ。あなたがここにいたいっていうのなら無理強いはできないもの。それより教えてほしいことがあるの。前にあなたが言ってた気になる人って土方さんのことなの？
I wasn't quite sure how to answer that question. Well, to be honest, I don't really know Hijikata-san that well, but... I stumble over my words. Not quite sure how to explain to her how I felt, perhaps because I wasn't quite sure myself. The men call him the demon because he's so strict and harsh with the soldiers. A lot of people think that he doesn't care about anyone and that he's cold, but I think he has a kind heart in there. He has a lot of responsibilities, and the whole Shinsengumi rides on his back. I don't think he has any choice but to act like that. I don't know what I can do for him, but I want to stay here and do whatever I can. What? I gave her a confused look, but Sen smiled and continued.
私のご先祖様にあたる鈴鹿御前も坂の上の田村麻呂って人間の男に恋をして今日までついてきたんだって。その子孫が私だから、あなたの気持ちは私にもわかるつもりよ。どんな事情も立場も恋の前には無力だもんね。
What? Wait, what? Love, I never meant... She only rested her hand on my shoulder and continued, look at that face! She knows exactly what she means.
人と鬼っていう立場の違いはあるけど、うまくいかないって決まったわけじゃないもんね。 頑張ってね。応援してるから。
姫様、 そろそろ参りませんと。
あ、そうね。それじゃあ元気でね。風間は本当に手強い鬼だから気をつけて。もし何かあればいつでも知らせてちょうだい。私と連絡を取りたいときは速やに手紙を届けてくれればいいわ。
All right. Thank you. Goodbye. In mere moments, they were gone. Circumstance and rank mean little before the power of love. But was this thing I felt, this desire to be close to Hijikata-san, was that really love? I just wanted to be around him and help him. Besides, the most important thing to Hijikata-san was the Shinsengumi. He'd built it up from nothing and put everything he was into it. With Warwick and Satsuma and Choshu brewing, he hadn't the time to think of anything else. That being the case, as someone under the care of the Shinsengumi, I needed to think of how I could best put my own skills to use. I need water. Oh no, I'm out of water. Hold on, I'll be back. I need more! I've returned! As the evening came, I was helping to prepare dinner at the Fushimi Magistrate. It seemed like the best course of action I had at the time was to prepare meals. I couldn't even prepare many of the side dishes, so all I could do was cook rice for them. But even then, I wanted to make eating easy for warriors who were constantly on the move, so I made rice balls and I handed them out. Has anyone not gotten any meals yet?
こっちにもください。もう一つ食べてもいいですか?
Of course. Have as many as you'd like.
じゃあ俺も。
The warriors were ravenous, reaching out for the rice balls with their wet appetites. I had set some aside for the captains already, so I suppose it was all right. Once I'd passed them out, the rice balls were almost all gone in an instant. Eventually, it was down to the last rice ball in the basket. The warrior reaching out for it noticed it was the last, and he stopped himself. There are more left, so please take it.
ありがとうございます。
The young warrior had looked so excited as he grabbed it. I was going to use whatever was left over for my dinner, but there was no rice ball left at the end. Still, I was a lot happier knowing the warriors could eat instead of worrying about myself. I guess I'll hold out until the next meal. My stomach just growled. Thank goodness no one was around to hear it. Maybe it's best if I drink some water. As I was heading to the kitchen, I suddenly heard a voice come from behind me.
今のはお前の腹の音か。
Hijikata-san! Where did he come from? And he even heard my stomach growl? That was...
大使どもが夕飯を全部食っちまったらしいが、お前は食ったのか？
I'll eat later. I'm fine.
食ったのかって聞いてるんだ。
Well, no, not yet. My voice was timid as I answered, and Hijikata-san sighed before taking something out of his pocket. Oh, whoops! What he'd taken out of his pocket was one of the rice balls, wrapped in a bamboo leaf that I'd left out for the captains earlier. This should be yours, Hijikata-san.
いいから食え。
No, Hijikata-san, you should eat it instead. I refrained from grabbing it, but Hijikata-san gritted his teeth from being annoyed, and we both stared at the rice ball being offered.
「もしかして遠慮してんのか？半分ずつだ。これならいいだろう。
He gruffly split the rice ball in half, and then he handed it to me. The force of his hand as he reached towards me. It was a statement that he wasn't going to take no for an answer. I grabbed the rice ball from his hand. Thank you. Then I will take your offer and take your half. As soon as I grabbed the rice ball, Hijikata hastily bit into his half and scarfed it down. I saw him, and I too rushed to bite my rice ball. As soon as I'd swallowed my first bite, I nearly melted from the relief of eating. This is delicious. Despite Hijikata-san standing over me, the satisfaction of food entering my stomach prevailed. My eagerness made me a little self-conscious. Hijikata-san, however, seemed unfazed by it, and he spoke as he continued eating his rice ball.
他人にばっか気を使ってねえで、飯ぐらい自分の分はちゃんと食え。わかったか？
I'll be sure to do that next time.
別に怒ってるわけじゃねえ。
Then he'd stopped chewing and muttered with chunks of rice in his mouth. Don't worry. I'd rather be eaten by the other men. I could always eat later. I'll be fine.
そうじゃねえ。今日、お前がここに残ると決めてくれたことにだ。
Oh. Yeah, I decided today to stay with the Shinsengumi. Despite Sen offering me a safe place to hide out, I had turned her down. I made the decision to stay beside this man. And Hijikata-san was happy about it too. Hi! I was rushing to eat the rest of my rice ball, but suddenly I didn't feel so hungry anymore, as if another feeling made all others vanish. However, it seemed like Hijikata-san was just standing there, watching me finish the rest of my rice ball. I'm fine now. I'll do my best. I was so happy that Hijikata-san had entrusted me to watch the compounds, so I couldn't help but straighten up as he spoke to me. And I think Hijikata-san flashed a quick grin when he saw that. He turned around and disappeared to the back of the building. I watched his back the whole time. Just before the beginning of the new year, Okita's condition worsened. It was determined that he had contracted pulmonary tuberculosis. His disease wasn't uncommon, but it was incurable. I suspected that he might be seriously ill when he began to lose his strength, but had never guessed that tuberculosis was the cause. The entire Shinsengumi was shocked and saddened by the news. It was decided that he was to head to Osaka, where Matsumoto-sensei was residing with Kondo-san, who was also in dire need of treatment. The new year came, and it was now 1868. Kyoto was still on high alert. I gotta remember, they say Kyo instead of Kyoto. The Shinsengumi remained on standby at the Fushimi Magistrate's office through the year-end celebrations. My hope that tempers would calm and the threat of war would fade lasted until 3 days after the new year. A dispute arose between the Satsuma domain and a group of shogunate troops attempting to enter Kyo. Violence broke out, and suddenly, war was upon us. The shogunate army in Kyo numbered roughly 15,000 men, while the Satsuma Choshu alliance commanded only 5,000. Victory for the shogun should have been a foregone conclusion. The Satsho, however, had bet their very livelihoods on this war, and determination and morale were high. Perhaps more importantly, the Satsuma had faced the British in battle, and the Choshu had faced the British, French, and Dutch. Both domains had learned modern Western tactics, armed with only swords against the Satsuma and Choshu rifles. The Shinsengumi were at a tremendous disadvantage. They used Western tactics, yet they're imperialists, which means they don't really like foreigners and stuff, and the West. But yet, I don't know, unless I have this whole thing wrong. What? During the war, the Fushimi Magistrate Office was yawned to oblivion and hell. No, set on fire, and the Shinsengumi had no choice but to retreat from Kyo. Yeah, I'm fine. We can't afford to stop. I'll be alright. I wiped the sweat from my brow, took a deep breath, and forced my throbbing feet to move. We were on our way to Kyoto Castle, under orders from Hijikata-san. The Shinsengumi was doing poorly, so we've been dispatched to bring reinforcements. Do you really think the people at Kyoto Castle will help us out?
としてでも助けてもらわねばな。トシさんのためにも絶対に。あの人に負けは似合わない。もうあの人のあんな顔は見たくないからな。
I remember the Battle of Fushimi all too clearly. On the evening of the third day of the new year, the war began. Cannons pounded the Fushimi magistrate's office, and the ground shook with each impact.
土方さん、もう無理だ。奴ら坂の上にバカでかい大砲を仕掛けてやがる。坂を登ろうとした橋から撃ち殺されちまう。ありゃ切り合いに持ち込むなんて無理だぜ。
しかも奴らの持っている銃、射程が恐ろしく長い。あれほど離れているというのに、2発に1発が命中している。
新八のやつはどうしたんだ。見当たらねえが。
新八なら2番隊15名とともに敵陣へ切り込みに行ってる。
敵陣に切り込みって正気か。どう考えたって生きて帰ってこられるはずがねえだろう。
I could see muscles working in Hijikata's jaw, but he said nothing. His face was pale, although whether from fear or tension, I couldn't tell. Outside, the roar of the cannons continued unabated. Just when it seemed certain that Nagakura must have perished.
よう、ただいま。今戻ったぜ。
新八!
Cries of surprise filled the room.
生きていたのか。まさか。
おっと、幽霊じゃないぜ。よく見てくれよ。足もちゃんとついてるから。
The thing about Nagakura is incredibly hard to fucking kill, and the fact that he's ends up being one of the survivors at the end of the actual Shinsengumi. Holy shit. he is stubborn as fuck. It takes a whole lot more for him to fucking die. He lived for a very long time. In fact, it is a known fact that he enjoyed movies a lot. And I think he died in 1915? I could be wrong about that. He grinned as he wiped a thick smear of blood and dirt from his face.
ただ、敵本陣に飛び込むのはどうやっても無理だった。先に出て行った合図の部隊も押し返されてるみてえだ。
副長、この先に進むのはかなり困難かと。ご決断をお願いします。
His brow furrowed, and he scowled furiously.
おい、なんだこりゃ。どこかから煙が流れてきてやがるぞ。
大砲の火が奉行所に燃え移ったか。さっさと逃げねえとやばいぜ。土方さん、撤退だ。
Even Nagakura's pleas seemed to fall on deaf ears. Until this moment, the Shinsengumi had never known defeat in battle, but they were helpless against the firearms of the Satsuma and Choshu. The Shinsengumi was Hijikata-san's life. Defeat was hard to accept. After what seemed like an eternity, he let out a long, ragged sigh. His knuckles turned white. There were several more minutes of tense, breathless silence before he finally looked up, his eyes burning with fury.
ここは撤退だ。だがまだ負けたわけじゃねえ。この借りは必ず返してやるからな。
Fury wasn't the only thing in those eyes. Behind them, I could see a bitter, desperate agony.
あの人がどんな思いで撤退の言葉を口にしたか。付き合いの長い私にはよくわかってるつもりだ。負け戦なんてのは一度経験すればもう十分だよ。私は刀としてはまるっきり勇さんたちの役に立たないと思ってる。
What? No, don't say that. He interrupted me with a kind smile and continued.
こんな私でも新選組を勝たせるためにできることはきっと何かあるはずだ。だから頑張ろうな。
Ah. The Shinsengumi and Kondo-san and Hijikata-san needed my help. I had to do whatever I could. It took us several hours to reach Yodo Castle. Hijikata-san's hope was to use the castle as a new staging area where he could garrison our troops and launch ambushes from. Unfortunately, that's weird. Why are the gates closed? Do you think they're already preparing for battle? There were no guards outside the castle anywhere we could see. It was uncomfortably quiet. He stood for a moment, absently rubbing his chin in thought, before finally making a decision.
我々は幕命を受けて参った。お上に弓引く逆賊を迎え撃つため力を貸してもらいたい。
His voice echoed out through the stillness, but no one responded. I had almost begun to think the castle was simply abandoned when... Look! There's someone in that window. Huh? They've got something shiny.
危ない。伏せなさい。
Huh? Inoue grabbed me by the wrist and pulled me. Gunshots echoed from the castle walls. My eyes started around, but there was no rebels nearby. That meant that the bullets were meant for us. But what's going on? I thought the Yodo were friendly.
薩長の勢いに気をされたか。はたまた民を戦乱に巻き込みたくないとの辛抱遠慮か。とりあえず本体へ戻ろう。これ以上ここにいるのは危険だ。
But Hijikata-san told us to get reinforcements from Yodo. Inoue only shook his head.
あんたももう分かってるだろう。彼らは我々の味方ではない。ここに長居すればするだけ、あんたの身を危険にさらすことになる。
But if we leave, then what's going to happen to Hijikata-san? What's going to happen to the Shinsengumi? Let's try to talk to them. If we explain what's going on, I'm sure they'll understand. I've never seen Inoue glare at me before.
いい加減にしなさい。トシさんのために増援を呼びたいのは私だって同じだ。だが私はヨド藩に援軍を頼みに行くのと同時にあんたを守る役目も仰せつかってるんだよ。もしあんたの身に何かあれば命令に背くことになる。さあ。
There was nothing I could say. Inoue had fought alongside Hijikata-san since their first days in Edo, before the Shinsengumi. He had undoubtedly felt even more devastated by Yodo's betrayal than I had, but he still had chosen to retreat so that he might protect me. Never before. Much yawning. Never before had I felt so ashamed and so helpless. There was nothing I could do. I'm sorry. I'm useless. I failed. Tears welled up in my eyes and I brushed them away roughly.
気にせんでいいよ。何、トシさんのことだ。きっとこの状況をひっくり返すだけの奇策を考えてくれるさ。
He laid his hand on my shoulder and gave it a gentle, reassuring squeeze. I focused on the warmth of his hand and felt myself begin to calm down. Your hand is warm. It reminds me of when my father used to pat me on the head when I was a little girl.
父様か。そうだな。私も本来はあんたくらいの娘がいてもおかしくない年なんだよな。
I'm sorry. Did I say something wrong?
いやいや、そんなことないさ。こんな可愛い娘なら大歓迎だ。さあ、戻ろうか。私たちがなかなか戻ってこなくて 大使たちも心配しているだろう。
Alright, I wish we had more scenes with Gensan. Holy shit. What? We were nearly to the location where we left the rest of the soldiers, but something felt wrong. Wait. Weren't they supposed to be here? There wasn't a single soul around. Did we get lost?
いや、そんなはずはない。確かここをまっすぐ行ったところに。
Then, as we rounded the corner, I noticed something lying on the ground. Inoue! There's someone over here!
まさか、薩長の軍勢はまだここまで来ていないはずだが。
He's wearing Shinsengumi blues. Could he?
足音を立てるんじゃない。ゆっくり近づこう。
I nodded. Could the Sacho Alliance already have troops here? If they did, they were hiding them very well. Neither Inoue nor I could sense anyone nearby. No rebels, but no Shinsengumi either. Then we came around another bend in the road and I gasped. Warriors in the blue jackets of the Shinsengumi were piled up along the road, dead where they'd fallen. And standing in the middle of this carnage.
見覚えのある羽織を着た連中がうろついているからまさかとは思った。
The bitch has arrived!
やはり貴様らも来ていたか。
Kazuma's smile was a cruel, mocking thing. You! Why? I was so furious I could barely speak.
ヨド藩の動向を見に出向いたまで。面倒ごとにもたまには手を出してみるものだ。まさかこんなところで会えるとは思わなかったぞ。
I felt his eyes on me, like those of a snake staring down its prey before they shifted to take the ground around him.
お前が戻ってくるまでの退屈しのぎにこの連中と遊んではみたが、残念ながら暇すら潰せなかった。
Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Inoue shake with rage. Most of the men who lay dead on the ground in front of us were members of his 6th Division. And now, because I had chosen to stay with the Shinsengumi, Kazuma had returned, and Inoue's men were dead. Kazuma had taken their lives, and for what?
前回は思わぬ邪魔が入った。今度こそ一緒に来てもらうぞ。
Kazuma had demonic powers that put him in a class above any mortal man. 2 skilled swordsmen working in concert might be able to hold him back, but not defeat him. Inoue and I would not be able to defeat him, nor, as I suspected, would he allow us to escape. If I surrendered to him, however, then he might let Inoue leave. I stepped forward and steeled myself.
下がっていなさい。
Inoue moved forward to put himself between me and Kazuma. Inoue? I had a bad feeling about this. What are you doing?
早く逃げなさい。そして、トシさんにこう伝えてくれ。力不足で申し訳ない。最後まで共に荒れなかったことを許してほしい。こんな私を今日まで一緒に連れてきてくれて、最後の夢を見せてくれて、感謝してもしきれないとね。
No! I can't do that! I won't just leave you here to die! This man is after me! If I go with him, then you can live! Please! Inoue's smile was bitter.
やれやれ。女を盾にして逃げろっていうのかい。そりゃ武士の風上にも置けんだろう。それにな、 子供を守って死ぬってのは親の本望でもある。
Ah, this hurts. Oh, this hurts. This hurts so much.
親ってのは子供より先に死ぬもんだからな。
But Inoue had finished talking, though. He turned his back to me and drew his sword. Suddenly, I remembered the conversation we had on the way back from Kyoto Castle. He told me that he was old enough to have a daughter my age. No, I cried to myself. That doesn't mean he has to do this. How could he throw his life away? Please, Inoue, run! I screamed and pleaded, but his back didn't move.
本情の別れは済んだ。では、先ほどの言葉に込められた本気がどれほど試してみるとする。
Cosma let his hand fall from the hilt of his undrawn sword. Inoue launched himself at Cosma and swung his in a wide arc towards the demon's neck. Cosma's sword slithered out of its scabbard too fast for the eye to follow. His hand simply blurred and the tip of his blade emerged from Inoue's back. Blood bubbled out between his lips. Inoue! He fell to his knees, the deep red stain rapidly devouring the light blue of his jacket. Kazuma's eyes flickered like sparks, and he bent down to whisper to Inoue.
先ほど俺に殺された連中、お前の部下だ。敵を討ちたくはない。武士というのは仲間の仇討ちを美徳とすると言いましたぞ。
Inoue glared back at him with white, hot rage. He reached into the pocket of his kimono and was taking something out. It was... No.
清水か。どこまでも見苦しいやつめ。潔果てたぞ。貴様ごときもはや生かしておくだけの価値もない。そのまま苦しんで死ね。
Inoue lifted the tip of the lid, attempting to drink the water of life, but then... Kazuma simply laughed and stepped easily around Inoue's swinging sword. I didn't even see him strike. There was only the momentary flicker of sunlight on a blade, and blood ruptured from a gash across Inoue's chest. The bottle dropped to the ground and broke.
すまん。どうも力が入りすぎてしまったよ。
He ground his teeth, trying desperately to overcome the pain, and turned his strained gaze to me.
何をしている？早く逃げんか。
His face looked intense, like a demon, as he shouted at me. I scrambled to my feet and turned to leave.
どうしがたい愚か者というのもいるもんだ。なぜこれだけの力の差を目の当たりにしてなお戦いをやめようとするのか。理解に苦しい。
Hearing Cosmo's cold laugh behind me, I felt something inside me snap. Stop! Don't! As I cried out, I heard the awful sound of steel slicing through flesh. Time slowed to a crawl, and I could do nothing but watch as Inoue fell, without a cry, to the ground. Inoue! Inoue! Even as part of my mind screamed at me to run, I scrambled toward him, grabbing for his hand. It was still warm. A warmth like my father. But Inoue's eyes no longer saw. His ears no longer heard. He had joined his men among the corpses on the road.
邪魔者はいなくなった。もうお前を助ける。さあ、おとなしく俺と共に来るのだ。我が妻となる女を。
He flicked his sword clean and sheathed it. Then he stepped forward and reached for my hand. Whoops. We're getting revenge for Inoue-san. Inoue had told me to run. Hichikata-san needed to hear his last words, and I was in no position to fight a demon. I knew all this, and I could hear a part of my mind screaming at me to run, but the roaring flames of rage drowned it out. How could I have let him die to protect me? Inoue was so kind. Just looking at his lifeless body sprawled in the dirt made my heart feel as though it would shatter into 1,000 pieces. But more than anything, I hated Kazuma for killing my friend as if he was nothing more than an irritating insect. I grabbed desperately for my kodachi and pulled it from its scabbard, bringing it up into an attack position.
お前はもう少し賢しい女だと思っていた。人間と暮らすうちに毒が頭にまで回った。悪態したぞ。
Shut up! Hot tears rolled down my cheeks.
何をそんなに怒る。この虫けらのような男を殺されたのがそんなに悔しいか。たかが人間が鬼に歯向かったんだ。当然の末路だろう。
Shut up! Shut up! Never in my life had I spoken to someone like that. But never in my life had I so wanted to kill someone. If only I had been able to transform my wrath into strength, I would have been the strongest creature alive. You! I can never forgive you for what you've done! Please, Inoue, give me the strength to strike him down. I tightened my grip on my sword, my knuckles white, and leapt towards Kazuma with a yell. Contemptuously, he slapped my strike aside. My kodachi flew out of my hands and clattered to the ground. I reached out to grab it again. Kazuma's foot came down on my arm and pain shot through it.
さて、茶番は終わりだ。
His red, arrogant eyes burned into mine. The eyes of the monster who had killed Inoue.
しかし、どちらが主なのかをわきまえぬ振る舞いは不快だ。二度と俺に逆らう気など起こさぬ。仕置きをしておくか。
I felt the cold steel of his sword on my throat.
しつけには苦痛がよく効く。幸い傷を負ってもすぐ癒える身だから。
Damn you! I glared at Kazuma with all the anger I could muster, but all I got in return was a cruel smile. Inoue had told me to run. But I hadn't, and now I couldn't. Kazuma was right about one thing. I couldn't escape from him. If I couldn't escape, then at least I could refuse to give him the satisfaction of a complaint victim. If all you're going to do is use me however you like, then I might as well bite off my tongue and drown in my own blood!
おい、誰がそんな真似を許した？俺の目の届かねえところで勝手に命を投げ出そうとするんじゃねえ。
The moment I heard that voice, my head suddenly cleared. There was no way I could mistake it. It was Hijikata-san! I felt tears spring to my eyes again, but for a very different reason. This was no dream, no hallucination. Toshizo Hijikata-san stood in front of me.
くそ、嫌な予感が的中しやがった。
He stopped just as his voice was about to crack, and simply looked at Inoue's body, his face twisted with grief and regret. Hijikata-san's jaw tightened, and his breath shook as if he were about to cry. His originally cold eyes were changed. They shone now with a brilliant fires of rage. With tight, deliberate purpose, he gripped his sword, the Oh god. Izumi no Kami Kanesada. Fuck. Izumi no Kami Kanesada. It whispered through the air as he raised it to an attack stance. I lost everything now. Ah!
無駄死にがまた増えるか。なぜそこまで死に急ぐのか理解できぬな。手間はかかるが仕方あるまい。かかってこい。
Kazuma's voice was bored, but as he spoke, the fire in Hijikata-san's eyes grew into a raging furnace.
無駄死にとほざきやがったか。
Hijikata-san roared with wordless fury and launched himself towards Kazuma. With all of his weight behind the blade, he struck at the demon's neck. Kazuma flicked his sword up to catch Hijikata-san's. For a moment, it looked as though they were evenly matched. And then Kazuma was thrown back. From the look on his face, it was likely the first time he'd ever found himself overpowered by a human, and he was stunned. Hijikata-san didn't let that opening go to waste. He pushed forward, his sword hissing back and forth through the air as if possessed. Game? 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 Yo, what? Alright, there we go. It didn't do it by itself. Whoa, that's weird.
まさかこの姿を人前にさらすことになるとは。喜べ人間。本物の鬼の姿を目にした瞬間、死ねるのだからな。
With that, the battle changed. Kazuma's sword hummed and flickered through the air with ease, far faster and smoother than it had been a minute before. It was all Hijikata could do to anticipate and block his strikes, leaving him no time to try and land an offensive blow of his own.
どうしたさっきまでの勢いは。 お前が感じていた悔しさとはその程度のものだったのか。
Kazuma's demonic strength and endurance were beginning to show. He wasn't even breathing hard. Hijikata-san, however, was running short of breath. All Kazuma had to do was tire him out, and he threw his full strength behind his sword and lunged at Kazuma one more time. The demon anticipated his blow easily and twisted to the side as Hijikata-san's blade kept swept past him. Bleh. Kazuma's hand snapped out and Hijikata-san's sword fell, clattering to the ground. Hijikata-san! I picked up my kodachi from the floor. Instinctively, I charged towards Kazuma, hoping it would help even a little, but... Kazuma kicked me and I fell to the floor. Can we... God, I want to fix this so badly. It's ground, not floor. In my mind's eye, I could already see him crumpling to the dirt just as Inoue had done. Hijikata-san was huffing loudly, reaching for the sword that was knocked out of his hands just a second ago. He fell to his knees, his chest heaving. Sweat rolled down his forehead in streams, and the cloth of his shirt was soaked. Kazuma lifted his sword and pointed it at Hijikata-san. His mouth curved up into a cold, confident smile. As Kazuma spoke, Hijikata-san dragged his tired body across the ground towards his fallen sword. Hijikata-san had reached his sword. With the last ounce of strength he possessed, he lifted it up once again and turned to face his foe. No. Hijikata-san was not the sort of man to care about a difference in strength, but neither was he the sort of man that would simply abandon victory. So why, then, had he not responded? As I watched, he pulled out something from inside his shirt. A tiny bottle filled with red liquid. Hijikata-san replied with a toothy grin. Hijikata-san's grin never wavered. Hijikata-san, no! My cries fell on deaf ears. Hijikata-san lifted the bottle to his lips and drank. In Hichikata-san's place, there was now a white-haired demon.
うるせえんだよ。
Hichikata-san's voice rumbled out from the fury, dark and low, like approaching thunder.
いい加減我慢ならねえ。腰抜けの幕府どもも邪魔くせえ鬼もまがいものだと。それが一体どうしたってんだ。俺たちは今までも散々武士のまがいものとして扱われてきたじゃねえか。
His eyes burned with anger.
だけどな、今の世の中、どこに武士がいるってんだよ。腰が引けて城の中閉じこもって日和見決め込んで、あわよくば勝ち馬に乗ろうなんて考えてる。いやしい連中ばかりじゃねえか。俺たちはそんな連中よりよっぽど武士だぜ。
Hijikata-san's words weren't just for Kazuma anymore. They were for Inoue, who had sacrificed himself in battle, for the shogunate and his counselors who didn't have the courage to make the difficult decisions, and for everyone who had ever refused to treat the Shinsengumi as true warriors.
何があってもてめえの信念だけは曲げねえ。どんな時でも絶対に後退はしねえ。俺たちはそれだけを武器にここまでやってきた。まがいものだろうがなんだろうが貫きゃまことになるはずだ。つまりこの羅刹の力でお前を倒せば、俺たちは本物になれるってこったろう。
The predatory grin on Hijikata-san's face wasn't human. When he leapt at Kazuma, he moved so fast that I could barely even see him. He'd been impressive as a human, but as a fury, he was beyond belief. Kazuma smashed aside the first attack, but a second followed it almost immediately, and then a third. Blow after blow crashed against his defenses, giving him no time to even breathe.
ほら、どうした？俺たちは虫けらなんだろう。押し負けてるぜ、鬼さんや。
Hijikata-san's eyes flashed like a great beast closing in on its prey, and he lunged at Kazuma. With an effort, he managed to swing his blade up in time to catch Hijikata-san's, but he'd lost the advantage of superior strength. His sword rebounded from Hijikata-san's strike, and Kazuma was forced back. Hijikata-san leapt for the opening. Hijikata-san's sword moved too fast for the eye to see. A line of blood simply appeared on Kazuma's face. He clapped a hand on it in surprise and pain, and jumped back, trying to put space between them.
こりゃいいや。凄みが増していい男になったじゃねえか。さて、まがいものに傷をつけられた感想はどうだ？鬼の大将さんよ。
Kazuma didn't even seem to hear Hijikata-san's words. He simply stared, eyes wide, at the blood that fell from his face to pull in his hand. Even as I watched, his wounds closed themselves. The stream of blood slowed to a trickle and then stopped. Though the wound itself had disappeared, it seemed the ramifications had not.
まがいものの分際でよくもこの俺の顔に傷をつけたな。
It must have been the first time he'd ever been wounded by a human. Kazuma's paternally calm face was distorted now by rage and disgust. It was the first time I had ever seen him truly look like a demon.
絶対に許さんぞ。この世に存在するあらゆる苦痛を味わわせ、なぶり殺しにしてやる。
本性を表しやがったな。いいぜ。できるもんならやってみやがれ。
He bared his teeth in a wicked smile. Their swords collided with a resounding crash. Kazuma had been strong before, but now his blows landed with all the strength of a cannon. What? Veins stood out on Hijikata-san's neck and forehead as he strained against the onslaught.
貴様ごときまがい者がこの俺の顔に傷を。
Kazuma had gone mad with rage, his golden eyes wide and bloodshot. Every time their swords met, I could see Hijikata-san's chip and shake. It looked as if the next blow could break it in two. Hijikata-san tried desperately to block with the back of the blade and protect it from more damage, but Kazuma's strikes were too quick and too powerful. Hatred rolled off of them in waves. Neither of them would be satisfied with simply killing the other.
絶対に許さねえぜ。地獄に落ちる時は共に引きずり込んでやる。
His clothes were soaked with blood, but eyes, lit with vigor and determination, shone out from beneath his white hair.
ふざけ、地獄に落ちるのは貴様だけだ。
They leapt at each other like enraged animals, blows flying so quickly that they could only defend or attack on instinct. It was clear that the battle would only end when one of them was dead, but it was rapidly becoming clear that Hijikata-san was fighting in a way that put him at a disadvantage. Back home, he'd always been so calm, even in the heat of battle, but cool detachment had fled from it with his humanity. I had to stop them. If I didn't, Hijikata-san would die, but awe and terror at the display of violence and skill had sealed my voice in my throat. Even though I was a demon just like Kazuma, I was helpless. It was maddening.
Oi, Yukimura-kun.
I heard footsteps pounding along the path and spun around to find the source of that familiar voice.
副長がヨド藩の様子を見に行ったきり戻っていないんだ。途中で副長に会わなかったか。
Yamazaki! His timing couldn't have been better. In that moment, Yamazaki looked like an angel. Anyway. We're in trouble. Hijikata-san's fighting a demon. Yamazaki stared at me for only a moment before he glanced past my shoulder and saw this battle raging there. His eyes widened in shock and horror.
なんだあの白い髪の鬼は。ラセンスか。いや、片方の鬼が着ている着物には見覚えがある。まさか。
That Hijikata-san. He drank the water of life.
なんだと。
With a dull twang, the sword leapt out of Hijikata-san's hand and clattered to the ground.
勝負あったな。その生蔵でよく今まで持ちこたえたもん。 。
貴
Hijikata-san kept low to the ground and slowly began to move away. Kazuma followed just as slowly, his grin widening at Hijikata-san's apparent fear.
およそ思いつく限りの苦痛を味わわせていたぶりながら殺してやる。
The advantage once again his. Kazuma's calm had returned. Oh god.
お前を慕う新選組の連中のもとに皮を剥いで塩漬けにしたムクロを送りつけてやるのもいいな。まずはその両腕を切り落とさせてもらおうか。そしてその肉を野犬にでも食わせてやろう。
Kazuma hefted his sword, its blade still clean and undamaged. Hijikata-san! I screamed as loud as I could, some irrational part of me hoping that might change the outcome. A horrible wet sound filled my ears.
貴様。
I looked up. Blood had splattered across the front of Kazuma's shirt, but Hijikata-san was unharmed.
何をしているんですか、副長。あなたは頭で、俺は手足のはずでしょう。
God, that's why this one hurts. Oh. Oh. I'm gonna.
そんな風に我を忘れて敵地に突っ込んでどうするんですか。
山崎、お前。
His voice shook. Yamazaki smiled back, his eyes shining as I'd seen them do when he and Hijikata-san were discussing important secrets.
手足ならたとえなくなっても会話聞きます。ですが頭がなくなってしまっては何もかもおしまいです。新選組は局長と副長お二人があってこそなのですから。
With that, he went limp, the last of his energy exhausted, and crumpled to the ground. Blood pooled beneath him, turning the packed dirt a deep red. Yamazaki! I grabbed a hold of him, as if that might somehow bring him back to consciousness.
山崎、お前、どうして。
His hair had slowly begun to shift back to its original color, and as I watched, he struggled to blink back tears.
おい、土方さん、山崎、源さん、どこにいるんだ。
Nagakura's voice echoed through the forest from some distance away.
仲間が駆けつけてきたか。かくなる上はお前たちだけでも。
Kazuma lifted his sword and made to swing it down when, out of nowhere, a hulking form appeared between us.
やめなさい。これ以上の戦いはいたずらに犠牲を増やすだけです。
傷を負わせた愚か者を見過ごせと。
我々がここで手を下すのはたやすい。ですがそれは薩摩藩の意向に反します。彼らはあくまでも自らの手による倒幕を望んでいます。我ら鬼の手によるものではなく。
His tone made it clear how little he thought of that desire, but his commitment to obedience was clearly greater. Kazuma wasn't pleased with Amagiri's interruption, but he seemed to feel that it was pointless to argue over the matter of his fellow demon.
土方と言ったな。お前の名前は決して忘れん。今日の借りは必ず返すから。覚えておけ。
そりゃこっちのセリフだ。てめえだけは絶対に地獄に落としてやらなきゃ気が済まねえ。
They glared at one another with such hate, I felt as if they might spontaneously combust. Then Kazuha spun on his heel and followed Amagiri off into the forest. No sooner had they disappeared.
いたいた。土方さん、これは一体どうなってるんだ。
大使がやたら死んでるみてえだが、もしかして薩長の奴らと戦ってたのか。だがこりゃどう見ても刀傷だよな。
山崎を見てやってくれ。まだ死んじゃいねえはずだ。
Nakakura stared in horror and sudden realization at Yamazaki's limp body.
おい、どうしたんだよ。しっかりしろって山崎。
こりゃひでえな。山崎はどうなっちまうんだ。まさか。
Yamazaki will. Judging by the severity of his wounds, I could hazard a guess as to what would happen, but I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud because I felt like it would seal his fate.
答えてくれって。山崎はどうなっちまうんだ。まさか。
Does anyone have any clean cloths?
布だったら俺の晒しを使ってくれ。
Thank you. I'll borrow it. Also, I need some sake to clean the wounds, preferably shoshu.
焼酎はさすがに持ってねえな。
近くにきれいな水が流れている沢があった。水を汲んでこよ
いや、俺が行ってくる。体力だけは自信があるからな。山崎のことよろしく頼むぜ。
Nakakura rushed and ran up the mountain.
う。副長、ここで一体何が。
Hijikata-san didn't even seem to hear him.
まさか今後俺が大使を犠牲にして生き延びることになるなんてな。
犠牲？
源さんの亡き丸があっちにあるんだ。埋めるの手伝ってくれねえか。あと源さんの部下の連中も。さすがにこの時期に野ざらしじゃいくらなんでも寒すぎるだろうからな。
I knew that he wanted to break down and cry more than any of us, but in front of his men he struggled to grin and joke. It was just too much. I felt myself began to sob, but I couldn't bear to do it in front of Inoue and Yamazaki, so I buried my face in my hands and the tears flowed soundlessly. Inoue had given his life to save mine. Ichikata-san had become a fury to fight the demon who chased me across Kyo. Yamazaki had taken a blow that might well end his life to protect Ichikata-san. What could I possibly do for them? How could I atone for my sins? I thought about it for a long time, but no answers came. That night, Sanan-san and the Fury Corps launched an attack in revenge for the events of the afternoon. Once the sun set, it became harder to aim a gun, which the Shinsengumi hoped would give the Fury Corps the advantage. At first it did, and the Furies were even more successful than they'd hoped. But then the gunners began to fire different special bullets, and the Fury Corps were quickly driven back. The loss was devastating, and our allies quickly crumbled. With the betrayal of the Yodo and Tsu domains, and the refusal of the Owari domain to become involved in any way, the Shinsengumi was alone. With our allies gone and enemies everywhere, we had no choice but to retreat to Osaka Castle.
ようやく着いたか。たく、こんなバカでかい城を建てやがって。ここにたどり着くまでに何日かかるかと思っちまったぜ。
土方さん、とりあえず俺たち山崎のやつを松本先生に見せてくっから。
ああ、頼む。
I performed emergency first aid on him, but Yamazaki had grown in pain all the way home. Considering how badly he was covered in deep gashes, I couldn't see him making it for longer. I was also worried for Hijikata-san. Now that he was a fury, being out in the sunlight had to be painful for him. Hijikata-san, are you feeling all right? I mean, physically.
なんだ、羅刹の俺がお日様の下うろうろしてるのがそんなに意外か。
Yeah, I mean, that's not what I was just wondering if anything had changed.
今んとこどこも変わりねえな。そのうちお日様を見るのさえしんどくなってくるんだろうし、今のうちに目に焼き付けとくか。
Oh no. Hijikata-san was joking, but what he'd said made me hang my head low.
お前がどう考えてるかはわからねえが、落ち水を飲むって決めたのは他の誰でもねえ、この俺だ。それに今まで何人もの大使に切腹だの羅刹かだの命じといて、てめえだけ腹が座ってねえってのもおかしな話だ。いつかこうなるんじゃねえかって気はしてたんだ。だからお前のせいじゃねえ。
It wasn't that easy, though. I couldn't just take him at his word and shed all the guilt I felt. When I looked up at him, though, his expression seemed somehow relieved. This is kind of a weird question, but did something good just happen?
ああ、もちろんだ。
He looked up at the castle walls and laughed.
ここに来てようやく明るい未来が見えてきたぜ。
We do?
ああ、この城は何があっても絶対に落ちねえ。ここにこもってる限り俺たちの負けはねえってことだ。真田幸村でもできなかった戦をできるかもしれねえんだぜ。
Eh?
しかも源さんや山崎の敵を討てるときたら、これが撃たれずにいられるかよ。
The man I'd watched fight the demon Kazuma was nowhere to be seen. Hijikata-san's face now was that of a man looking forward, determined to win. I smiled to myself. He hadn't given up hope. Hold on. I've returned. There was a phone call, so yeah. We're fine. Absolutely fine.
副長、こちらにいらっしゃいましたか。
どうした？
これから江戸に引き上げるので船に乗ってくださいとのことです。
江戸に？どういうことだ？ここで薩長の奴らを迎え撃つんじゃねえのか？
それが
He hesitated, and I sensed that it was out of reluctance, not confusion. When he spoke, he sounded as if even he didn't quite believe what he was saying.
慶喜公は船でもう江戸に向かってしまっているとのことです。ですので、これ以上ここにいても。
For a moment, Hijikata-san simply stood there stunned. When he spoke, his voice was a sinister growl.
船で江戸に向かってるってのはどういうことだ？
Uh-oh.
幕軍が命がけで戦ってたってのに、それを見捨てて、てめえだけさっさとお逃げ遊ばしたってことか。
それは俺にもよくわかりませんので。
Shimada didn't look much more pleased about the situation than Hijikata-san. Unable to contain his frustration, he kicked out at the nearest tree. His eyes thinned and he kicked it several more times. At last he stopped, slightly out of breath, and tried to regain his earlier calm.
そもそも俺は花から徳川の殿様のために戦ってきたわけじゃねえから。いくら上にやる気がなかろうが、俺たちには関係のねえことだ。伝習隊もいるし、幕府が海外から買った何隻もの軍艦だって無傷のまま残ってる。江戸に戻ったら喧嘩のやり直しだな。
Perhaps it was the desperate exhilaration of having your back to the wall, but I saw the fire of determination light in Hijikata-san's eyes. This war later became known as the Battle of Toba Fushimi. Throughout the war, the shogunate troops had the advantage in numbers, but they were no match against the Sacho, who successfully employed advanced weapons and Western tactics to gain the upper hand. Allegedly, the deciding moment was in the arrival of the gold brocade flag, which represented their alliance and backing of the imperial palace. When Lord Yoshinobu had discovered this had happened, he decided to retreat to Edo. At this point, the war became pointless to those serving the shogunate once their leader had left. The prospect of defeat is what moved the last remnants of the shogunate and the Shinsengumi to leave Osaka Castle for Edo. During the trip aboard the ship, Matsumoto-sensei and I took turns caring for Yamazaki.
雪村君、そこにいるのか。
Fuck! Yes, what's the matter? Are you in pain?
いや、副長にお伝えしたいことがあるんだ。読んできてくれるか。
Oh no, for him to call out for Hijikata-san must mean No, I couldn't think of that yet. Okay, I'll go and get him right away. Hold on. I hurried out of the cabin and went to call Hijikata-san. We rushed back to the cabin with Yamazaki immediately. Yamazaki, I brought Hijikata-san. Can you see him? Yamazaki's face was almost white as snow. Almost all of the blood had drained from his face. It was clear that the end for him was near. Cold sweat dripped profusely from his forehead, and Yamazaki started to speak meekly.
副長、最後までお手伝いすることができず、申し訳ございません。
何を言ってやがる。詫びるよりもその怪我を治す方が先だろうな。
Despite what he said, Hijikata-san's harsh tone sounded to me like he knew the end was near too. But I guess that was more of a reason for him to speak like he normally would to Yamazaki.
思えば、この4年間、あなたの手足となって働いた日々は何にも勝る宝でした。ハリー医者の息子だったこの俺が武士としての生を全うできたのは新選組があってこそです。願うわくば最後までお供したかったのですが。
Yamazaki spoke with staggered, pained breaths, and he mustered all his strength to speak his final words.
あんまり喋ると傷に触るぞ。
Then Yamazaki's eyes started towards me suddenly.
雪村君、今後も副長のことをよろしく頼む。副長が新選組が勝利する様をその目で見届けてくれ。
Watching this unfold was too much for my heart to bear. Fuck! It's a phone at this moment, really? Really? I get a call asking if I want food when there's like a fuck ton of spaghetti in the fucking fridge at this moment? Ah! Watching this unfold was too much for my heart to bear. I couldn't respond immediately. Hijikata urged me to answer, and I held back my tears as I responded. All right. Yamazaki, please. Just rest. When I answered him, Yamazaki's expression softened. After a while, he closed his eyes slowly. Yamazaki? No! I spoke his name aloud, but no movement came from his eyes, nor the rest of him, ever again. My boy! Yamazaki!
静かな最後だな。眠ってるみてえだ。
Ichikato-san's words confirmed what I hoped was just a dream. Yamazaki had passed in front of me. I crumbled to the floor. It was suggested by Enomoto of the Bakushin to do a burial at sea for Yamazaki.
大丈夫か、近藤さん。一人で立てるか。
ああ、すまないな、トシ。
Hijikata-san supported Kondo-san as he walked up to the deck, doing his best to contain his grief.
諸君、山崎進君は観察型の要として長年新選組を陰から支えてくれた。それがこのような最後を遂げることとなってしまい、俺も無念でならない。山崎君は無視の男だった。どんな時でも決して不平不満を漏らしたりせず、困難なタイムにも全力で当たってくれていた。そんな彼に敬意を表し、水槽という形で弔ってあげたいと思う。
Eventually, Yamazaki's body was carried forth by the pallbearers aboard the ship.
さらばだ山崎君。あの世で我々の戦いを見守っていてくれ。
After Kondo-san had finished his eulogy, Yamazaki's body was thrown into the sea.
さく、山崎の野郎。さっさと死んじまいやがって。
文句言っても始まらねえだろ。一番無念なのはきっと山崎本人だと思うぜ。
うるせえ。そんなことは俺だってよくわかってるんだよ。
Although none of the men seemed to be displaying their grief publicly, everyone's eyes were red. I could only assume they had shed their tears when they were without the company of others. Ichikata-san stood there, looking down at the sea as if he'd wanted to say something. Yamazaki's body drifted, popping up in between the trembling waves for a few moments, but soon his body had washed away, out of sight. I couldn't bring myself to sleep soundly because my mind focused solely on Yamazaki. I wandered to the deck. I stopped upon seeing an unexpected person.
お前か。どうしたんだ、こんな朝早くに。
I couldn't really sleep. How about you, Hijikata-san?
お前と似たようなもんだ。
There are literal tears in my eyes. Chad, fucking damn it. Oh my god, this read hurts as much because of that. So, this is accurate. This is so accurate, but painfully accurate. Yamazaki died of his wounds at sea. Now, people take this to mean two things. Either he died on the ship, or he died by drowning. The real answer is that he just died of his wounds on the ship, and most likely did have a burial at sea. The whole drowning thing, I don't know where it came from. I have no clue. I've seen some people try to figure it out, but nobody has a clue as to how that popped up. So there is something going on with that rumor, but I don't know where it came from. He did not drown in any way, shape, or form, or else the entire Shinsengumi would have drowned because they all went on the same ship. But, ow! My boy! He went out the way he wanted to go out. And it hurts. This hurts more than Okita's route. By a long shot. With all that had happened, I'm sure Hijikata-san needed some time to process all of it alone. He watched the stars covering the dark sky, like a ghost of the day before haunting from above. The sun began to faintly show its head in the east. Dawn was soon arriving.
お前の気持ちがわからねえわけじゃねえが、あんまりここに長居しねえ方がいいんじゃねえか。女は体を冷やしちゃいけねえって言うだろ。
I understand. I'll go back inside soon. Our conversation ended there. Together, for a moment, we listened to the endless movement of the ocean crashing against the ship. I couldn't shake the thought of how many men we'd lost in this battle.
"俺たちは誠の武士になりてえと思って必死に坂道を登ってきたつもりだ。その道を選んだことを間違いだと思ったことは一度もねえ。源さんや山崎、今回の戦で亡くなった連中もきっと同じ思いでいてくれたはずだ。だから生き残った俺たちは死んでいった皆が信じてくれた道を全うするしかねえんだ。
Hijikata-san was looking at the far eastern sky. His expression was so vigorous, almost scary. I felt as though I was witnessing the return of Hijikata-san's strength and unwavering determination. Almost as if he were opening my eyes. I don't know how I could ever repay the debt of Yamazaki and Inui's sacrifices. As Hijikata-san and I watched the sky, I felt compelled to tell him something that came to me. Hijikata-san, I need to tell you something.
なんだ。
To speak these words, I knew I needed courage to do it. I knew they could hurt him. Inoue wanted me to tell you something before he died. He said that he wanted to apologize for his incompetence, and he hoped you would forgive him for not staying with you until the end. He said he didn't have the words to thank you for giving a man like him the chance to be a part of something. And that he'd never forget what you did for him. As I was telling him this, I started to choke and began to sob. But I was finally able to tell him Inoue's final words. Hijikata-san's eyelids shook faintly, and I saw him gulping. And then...
たく、源さんも随分水郷のことを言うもんだな。力不足だと。夢を見せてくれて感謝しきれねえだと。あの人の人柄に支えられてたのは俺たちの方だっつうのに。
Hijikata-san was inhibiting himself from expressing the true weight of his emotions, and his eyes thinned. The sun had finally climbed from the horizon.
羅刹になっちまったせいかな。今日は日の光がやけに目にしみ上がる。
Hijikata-san stared resolutely towards the rising sun.
見ててくれよ、源さん、山崎。俺たちはこんなもんじゃ終わらねえ。江戸に戻ったらすぐに体制を立て直して、あんた方の敵を取ってやるからな。そして腰抜けの幕臣どもの心に、薩長のやつらの心に、新選組の名を刻みつけてやる。絶対に忘れられねえようにしてやるさ。
His face was so gallant in the shine of dawn, almost godlike, and I couldn't look away. If Hijikata-san, who shared an even deeper kinship with Inoue and Yamazaki than someone like me, could be strong, then so could I. It gave me a purpose to pull myself from the grief of the battle. This made me realize that I must do my best too, for everyone, for as long as I am by Hijikata-san's side. Ugh! Let's enjoy the ending. I have no thoughts at the moment. Besides pain, right? January 1868. The Battle of Toba Fushimi ended with the Satsuma Choshu victorious. As the shogunate troops retreated, the Shinsengumi headed towards Edo. 4 years ago, I came to Kyoto all by myself in search for my father, and met the Shinsengumi. I'm going to leave the city of Kyoto, where I made fond memories with the Shinsengumi. Despite the defeat, his resolve didn't waver, and I have chosen to walk alongside him. We are going to head to Edo, without knowing what fate awaits us. And we finish Hijikata Roots in Kyoto Winds. Oh my god. Saving. If I'm correct, the DLC part doesn't have Okita or Hijikata in it, does it? Nope. It does not. You know what? I was gonna say we could start Edo Blossoms, but I kinda... You know what? We're gonna start it. Goodbye, Kyoto Winds. We don't require your assistance anymore. We are now gonna switch to Edo Blossoms. And just started. I'm gonna give it like 30 minutes. Alright, now that that's updated, let's go and get it. It should be. Give it a second. Open, damn it. There we go. Yes. I'll let the opening play. Alright, let's do the DLC that I missed for Okita. There he is. Where does this take place? 1868 February. Alright, so we should be in the hiding place? Hold on. There we go. Even after having lived in Edo for most of my life, returning after a 4-year absence left me feeling like a stranger in my own hometown. Huh? I awoke in a stupor, finding myself bundled warmly in a blanket with a familiar scent. Is this Okita's blanket? Why is this here? My eyes took their time adjusting to their surroundings as I emerged from my haze. That's right. I fell asleep in Okita's room. Okita? My back shot straight up and I filtered my eyes around the room, but he was nowhere to be found. As I raced out of his bedroom, I did so in a panic. Okita! Are you in here? Silence, and the tatami creaked underneath my feet as I stepped cautiously through the hallway. I was perplexed, wondering how he'd mustered enough strength to leave his bedroom. Only then did I put together the pieces. He had been telling me how hell-bent he was on visiting Kondo-san. I broke into a sprint as I slid the front door open. I finally found him out in the front yard. Okita!
あれどうしたの千鶴ちゃん血相変えちゃって
There you are. Well, I was panicking because I didn't find you in your bedroom, so I came out looking for you.
ずっと部屋の中に閉じこもりきりだとさすがに息が詰まっちゃうから
Jeez, excuse me for being worried. If you needed some fresh air, you could have told me.
一応声はかけたんだけどね君ぐっすり寝ちゃってて何度起こしても全然目を覚ましてくれなかったから
What? Really? I'm so sorry.
別にいいけど僕の布団はそんなに寝心地が良かったそれとも僕のぬくもりかな
Please don't mock me.
からかってるつもりはないんだけど寝心地が良かったかどうかを聞いてるだけじゃない
I just had a lot on my mind recently. Sleeping has been a little difficult. Okita batted his eyelashes in response to my explanation, as if he were dissatisfied with how candidly I had answered.
なんだつまんないのそんなそっけない答え方されちゃ僕だって何もできないじゃない
Nothing to work with? What were you expecting, hmm?
だって今の言い方だと僕のことを何とも思ってないみたいだしこうやってそばにいてくれたり姿が見えなくなると血相変えて探しに来てくれるのは僕に同情してるだけなんて言われると結構傷つくんだけど
Oh. He had a point. I'd been so wrapped up in my own feelings that I had considered that maybe Okita needed someone to help ease his suffering. Between being separated from the Shinsengumi and being unable to see or speak with Kondo-san, the only person Okita had was me, and I was doing little to let him forget that fact. Forgive me, Okita. I hadn't realized.
別に謝る必要なんてないよ僕のこと好きなふりをしろなんて強制できないしね君は僕がかわいそうだからそばにいてくれるだけなんでしょそれぐらいよくわかってるから
No, not at all. I'd never be here just out of pit. I stopped myself, feeling constricted by the force of Okita's paralytic glare.
じゃあどうして
Well, although expressing my true feelings would no doubt elicit a smug reaction from Okita, I knew that telling him so far outweighed my feelings of sheepishness that came next. It's because I like you. I said no. I said so resolutely, looking him deep in the eye.
そうなんだ。まあ、うすうすそうなんじゃないかとは思ってたけどね。
Eventually, the man says. It was just as I had expected. No, it was even worse. Okita wore an expression befitting a warlord at the end of a fruitful conquest, not in the emission of feelings.
ちゃんと言えたご褒美に手をつないであげようか。
That's all right.
あれ？いらないの？僕のことが好きだって言ったくせに。
It was clear that refusing Okita only stoked his fire, and in fear of seeing him pout again, I decided to oblige him. Yet, there was an irresistible charm to him. Sure. Thanks, Okita. It may have irked me initially, but seeing his smile made everything worth it. Alright, who gave Okita the cute one? The cute scenario. Okay. It's too warm in here. On! I think that picked up. Anyway, we're gonna do a new game, and yes, we're keeping Chizuru. Because in this portion of the game, it gets said. And it's already on Hijikata because he's the first one. Whew, let's do it. Toshizo Hijikata. Prologue. Now this is all new to me because I have not touched this side. So I know nothing. I can only guess. Based on the actual events of the actual Hijikata. I can only guess. And from other routes, I can only guess. So, I'm in new territory. Yeah, let's go. Winter 1864. In order to find my father, with whom I'd lost contact, I, Chizuru Yukimura, visited Kyoto. In that city, I bore witness to a horrifying secret hidden within a group called the Shinsengumi, the Fury, a creature with white hair and crimson eyes. Luckily, I was saved from the vicious clutches of the Furious by Saito-san and Okita of the Shinsengumi, and perhaps most importantly, Toshizo Hijikata. Because I had discovered the Shinsengumi's secret, it was proposed that I live with the Shinsengumi men since they were also searching for my father. As such, I was to serve under Hijikata as the commander's page, a role I performed proudly. So thus began my life with the Shinsengumi. I'd heard rumors, well, whispers really, that the Shinsengumi was little more than a bunch of crooked ronin, but my life with them proved otherwise. Their commitment to protect the safety of Kyoto made them the last of a dying breed, true samurai. It set them apart from those who only craved power. The man tasked with leading the Shinsengumi, through these trying times, was Hijikata-san, who perhaps was better known as the Demon Commander. However, as I spent more time with him, I realized that this facade was a front in order to motivate his men in times where victory seemed impossible. I remember one such time where 3 men claiming to be demons, Chikage Kazuma, Kyuju Amagiri, and Kyo Shiranui, confronted the Shinsengumi. I discovered that I, too, was of demon lineage, which explained why they'd been pursuing me. But it was Hijikata-san who had been protecting me all along. Our situation, however, became increasingly dire. Anti-shogunate sentiments were growing intensely throughout the country, and the war between the shogunate and the sacho seemed inevitable. Then finally, the Battle of Toba Fushimi had begun. In order to protect me, Hijikata-san had drunk the water of life, which transformed him into a fury and overcame Kazuma in a one-on-one battle. The sacho, however, were victorious. So the Shinsengumi was forced into fleeing the city they called home, Kyo, and headed for Edo. Achievement, oh look. Would it kill you to smile? I mean, yeah. After arriving in Edo, we stayed at the Kama Inn, which was located in Shinagawa and had normally been designated for Hatamoto exclusivity. A recent attempt on Kondo-san's life required that he and Okita, who had contracted tuberculosis, were to stay with Matsumoto-sensei to treat their conditions. Losing the Battle of Toba Fushimi and Osaka Castle, and Lord Yoshinobu, the Supreme Commander, retreating. Shogunate Army, a highly organized military led by the supreme ruler, the Tokugawa Shogun. Any troops serving under the banner of the Shogun fall within its ranks. The fate of the Shinsengumi grew bleaker, and troops began openly voicing their doubts and concerns. Hi, Soma! You know what I didn't do? I didn't get the guide. Whoops. Let's get the guide. It just occurred to me at this moment. Give me the guide. Please? Thank you. Soma was the one to speak against the naysayers. Normally, such insubordination was met with harsh reprimanding, if not more, but things had changed. It wasn't just the tempers of the soldiers that were fraying. Nagakura and the others were just as tense. How did I watch the two men scurry off inside? Mito Domain, one of the three houses of the Tokugawa, the domain and their daimyo, have had strong nationalist tendencies for generations. Yo, why did it say Sacho now? What the fuck? Gold brocaded flag. Gold brocaded flag. The official flag of the Imperial Army. During the Battle of Toba Fushimi, it was the flag used by the Sacho to declare their alliance. Sacho. Yeah, Sacho is Sacho. I can't quite tell. Loyalists, a term for the philosophical and political leanings of those who support the shogunate.
薩長と戦うにも天のじゃ10にはかなわねえ。草刈りだ。
Nagakura sighed, letting his shoulders slump. If the men under you are willing to give their lives for your cause, then morale can always be raised. No matter what odds you may be up against. But Yoshinobu, in spite of this, chose to retreat. Then what were the Shinsengumi supposed to fight for? What were they supposed to do?
お先真っ暗だよな。あれこれ考えても落ち込むだけだし、吉原にでも遊びに行くか。
吉原ですか、この時期に。
バカ野郎、この時期だからこそ永久を養わなきゃならねえんじゃねえか。
そういえば斉藤さんは一体どこに。最近姿を見かけないんですか。
Nomura asked aloud, glancing around the room.
斉藤なら怪我人や病人の様子を見るため松本先生のところに出かけてるみたいです。
なるほど。
Winning the next battle was of utmost importance. I knew everyone was giving everything they had, but memories of the peaceful times back in Kyoto were like a candle flickering in the wind, one breath away from darkness. Sometimes I wondered. I wondered if those memories really happened at all. Oops. One day, an unexpected guest visited the Kama Inn.
こんにちは。ご無沙汰してます。
Yo! Okay! Oh, I believe you were Iba, was it? Hachiro Iba, the eldest son of one of the oldest and most respected dojos in Japan. He is a master of the Shingyoto Ryu martial arts, and his prowess granted him prestige among warriors and officials.
はい。トシさんに用事があってきました。取り次いでくれますか。
Please wait a moment. Sometime after I had led Iba to Hijikata-san's room, murmurs of conversation suddenly became exclamations. Toshizo Hijikata. After drinking the water of life during the Battle of Toba Fushimi, he became a fury, persevering through immense agonizing pain by working day and night to make up for Kondo-san's absence.
そいつは本当か。
はい。何でも急に外せない用事が入ったということで。
今日こそは何としても話を聞いてもらわなきゃ始まらない。ちと出かけてくる。
And with that, Hijikata-san stormed out of the room in a fit. He looked awful when I had come in. Really, all I could hope for was that he'd be alright. Did something happen?
今日面会する予定の幕臣の方に約束を保護にされそうになっていたので知らせに来たんです。
Good man, Iba. Hijikata-san had been attempting to gather shogunate support to launch another campaign against the Sacho by meeting with shogunate leaders. However, the unwillingness of the shogunate leaders to entertain Hijikata-san despite initiative means... Do you think the shogunate doesn't want to fight against the imperial army anymore?
何しろ総大将の慶喜公が新政府軍に恭順してしまっていますからね。僕も不用意な行動は慎むようにと上から言われていますし、こういう時は思うままに行動できるトシさんたちのことが少し羨ましいです。それじゃあ僕はそろそろおいとまします。皆さん方によろしく伝えてください。
Of course. I'm sorry that I couldn't offer you more courtesy in your stay. Shortly after Iba had left Kama Inn, a familiar figure approached to ask me something.
雪村君、副長は中にいらっしゃいますか？
Oh, you just missed him. He stepped out. Did you have business with him?
本当ですか？江戸に戻ってきてからというもの、獅子奮迅の働きぶりですね。
I know. I seriously wonder how he finds the time to sleep, if at all. As far as I knew, Hijikata-san should have been suffering in agonizing pain during the daylight hours because of his condition as a fury. However, seeing him work as tirelessly as he does, one would have no clue of his affliction at all. Shimada, are you okay? You look a little more gaunt than usual, like you've lost some weight.
まあ、山崎君が亡くなって仕事が増えましたからね。
Shimada!
彼の置き土産ですから、多少きつくてもなんとかこなさないと。それに、あれだけ働いてらっしゃる副長を見ていたら、俺一人休むなんて到底できませんよ。
I suppose. I knew how Shimada felt, but he was actually in a position to contribute. Unlike Shimada, there was nothing I could do for Hijikata-san, even though I yearned to be involved and do whatever I could to help him. The day he died, Inoue had told me that while I might not be much help to the Shinsengumi as a warrior, there were other ways that I might be of service. But what could I do for them? I thought about that every day since Inoue and Yamazaki had died, but I had yet to think of what it was that I could do.
それじゃあ、俺は他にも用事があるので出かけてきます。
Of course. Please be careful.
そうそう。最近辻斬りが増えているらしいですからね。夜の外出は控えてください。
Hi. Shimada nodded, and then he lifted himself heavily to his feet and left. Later that night, I was waiting in the empty common room for the captains to return. I sat idly, twirling my hands and my fingers when I saw...
Yo, Chizuru. Konbanwa.
Oh, Heisuke. Where's everyone else?
新八さんと佐野さんなら大使を連れて吉原に遊びに行っちまったよ。で、俺が留守番させられてるってわけ。俺あの人たちの使いっ走りでもなんでもねえんだけどな。雑用押し付けられても困っちまうぜ。まあ、以前と変わらない扱いをしてくれるっていうのは嬉しいけどさ。
His laugh sounded small and lonely in the empty hall. Oh, that reminds me. Do you know where Sanan-san is? Did he go somewhere?
三男さんなら見回りだってさ。
Patrol, but we're not in Kyoto anymore. No one's asked us to keep the peace in Edo. Why is he still doing it? Heisuke's face turned solemn, as if he were quietly searching for words while I waited in front of him. And then...
最近、三男さんの様子がおかしいんだ。今日も夜になってからいきなり見回りしてきますなんて言い出して。俺も一緒に行くって言ったんだけど、一人で平気だって言われちまってさ。
Oh. Well, I heard that there have been a lot of killings at night recently. Maybe he went out to see if he could learn anything about that. He might not have the same authority that he had in Kyo, but the Shinsengumi still worked for the shogunate. Perhaps Sanan-san was simply trying to protect Edo, regardless of whether he'd been asked to or not. Heisuke didn't really sound like he actually thought he was, however. Oh, Hijikata-san, welcome back.
なんだ
His face was still pale, but his tone was sharp. As I watched, I realized that he was only barely standing. He shook his head just slightly. He shook just slightly as he moved, and I got the feeling that if he let his concentration slip even a little, he would simply collapse. His legs wobbled underneath his kimono, and he curled his lips bitterly. There was something wrong, but what should I say? Is there anything I can do? No. Is there anything I can do to help? I knew what the answer would be, but I couldn't help asking. Ah, sokka. Even though everyone else was working themselves to the bone, barely sleeping or eating, all I could do was sit around, useless. No, I will keep giving you that look. I'm sorry. I realized as my words came out that I only made things worse, and apologizing would make me sound more miserable. That wasn't good at all. I needed to be more cheerful if I couldn't help. The least I could do was not bring everyone down. Eh? Okay, I'll be right back. I ran off to the kitchen with a grin on my face. Hijikata-san's words cheered my mood, even just a bit. Here you go. I could only find some rakugan to go with the tea, but... Rakugan! Rakugan, a dried confectionery made with rice paste, sugar, and starch syrup, which is then colored and shaped into bite-sized portions. This is new to me. I want some, I think. I want to try it.
Come on, 飲んだらすぐ仕事に戻らなきゃならねえからな。
そんなに働いて大丈夫なのか？羅刹になっちまったんなら夜だけ働いた方がいいんじゃねえの？
Hijikata-san didn't answer, instead choosing to sip his tea and sit in silence for a long, drawn-out moment.
大阪城から引き上げるときにな、近藤さんに言われたんだ。もし自分が大将だったら、たとえ兵士が2、300人になっちまっても、大阪城に立てこもって、とことんまで戦って、最後は腹を切って、武士の生き様を見せつけてやるの。
Damn.
肩に弾を食らって寝込んでるあの人がそこまで行ってる時に具合が悪いからって俺だけ休んでられねえだろ。
The prospect of handing over a fully functioning Shinsengumi to his friend brought a gleam in his eye. Shinsengumi to his master and friend. If the rest of the men worried because their chief was wounded by a coward's bullet, Hijikata-san was buoyed by the simple fact that Kondo-san was alive, and that he had the courage to do what other leaders would not. He finished his tea quickly and returned to his room, with only perfunctory thanks? Yesterday, his light had stayed on late into the night. Today would likely be no different.
でもさ、きついのはきっとこれからだぜ。土方さんはまだ羅刹になったばっかで、吸血衝動は出てないみたいだからな。
Bloodlust?
羅刹になるとな、血を飲みたくて飲みたくて仕方なくなっちまうんだよ。剣の稽古で思いっきりぶったたかれるのなんか比べ物にならねえくらい苦しくて、いっそ殺してくれって思うくらいだもんな。
Oh no. Ichikata-san already looked terrible. If unbearable pain were suddenly added to his list of many burdens. Is there any way to do anything about it?
血を飲めば嘘みたいに良くなっちまう。でもそれはあくまでもその場しのぎに過ぎねえからな。時間が経つとまた苦しくなる。しかも最初の頃は少しの血で良かったのに、そのうち多くの量を飲まなきゃ落ち着かなくなってくるんだ。
I was at a loss for words. A monster that could only survive by drinking human blood? It seems like the kind of monster that you could only hear about in legends. What about you, Hesuke? Are you, drinking blood?
頼むから聞かないでくれよ。そういうのは。
He made some manner of excuse after that and then shut up. He departed from the common room quietly, leaving me alone with my thoughts about Hichikata-san. Was he really okay? Had Hichikata-san already experienced the bloodlust Hesuke told me about? Did he refuse to tell anyone about his suffering? He couldn't have been in the throes of it when I saw him, but it was clear that sooner or later he would find himself in a great deal of pain. He was doing so much for the Shinsengumi. I wanted to do something, anything, to ease that pain. I know. He had been doing research on the Furies. Perhaps he left something useful behind at my house, or the one that used to be mine. It was already too late to visit, so I resolved to go the next day and see if I could find anything. The following day, I left a neatly written note behind at the inn for anyone who may have been wondering where I was headed. I departed from my old house in Edo. Hichikata-san had left long before me to meet with several members of the shogunate elite. No one had apparently visited the house in several years, and everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. Now, where would he keep his fury research? It must be somewhere hidden. I brushed some of the dust off a stack of documents and opened them up. Each one was covered in barely legible scribbles. It would take me forever to decipher them. No, this was nothing compared to what the rest of the Shinsengumi went through. I had to do it. Shoot. I guess that wasn't it either. I sat back on the floor and sighed heavily as my eyes drooped to look at the dusty, unkempt floor. How foolish I'd been to think I could waltz into my house, find my father's secret documents, and solve something that had plagued the Shinsengumi for years. No. I couldn't give up. I had to keep trying. Sooner or later, I'd find something. Hichikata-san and Heisuke needed my help. I had to find something. From the corner of my eye, I noticed an earmarked fold in the stack. Huh? As I flipped open a particularly thick sheaf of papers, a small stack fell out and landed on the floor as a cloud of dust floated from its landing place. It appeared to be some kind of... Was it a formula? Is this about the Furies? As I studied it, I realized what I found. The paper described a medicine that could suppress the Furies' bloodlust, keeping them from losing control. The idea of Hichikata-san or Heisuke losing control was frightening, but I read on. It seemed that my father had returned to Edo just after I left for Kyoto. While he was in Edo, he'd mixed up the ingredients for the medicine. I looked over the instructions. The ingredients he'd used were likely still in the warehouse. With his instructions, I should be able to mix it myself. This shouldn't take too long, right? And with my father's medicine, I could save Hichikata-san, Heisuke, and Sanan-san. I was going to seize this opportunity to help them. I ran to the warehouse and got to work. Come hell or high water, I would finish this. By the time I finished, night had already fallen, and moonlight peeked through the sliver of open window. I remembered what Shimada told me about how many murderers there'd been at night lately, and I stuck to busy streets as I made my way back to the Kama Inn. Just as I arrived, Sanan-san and Heisuke were leaving. Their backs were turned away from me, so I called out to them to make sure they hear me. Sanan-san!
おや、ずいぶん遅いお帰りですね。物騒ですから、夜一人で出歩くのは控えた方がいいですよ。
I'm sorry. I meant to come back earlier, but I was so busy, and I just kind of lost track of time, and... Anyway, I got something for you. I handed Sanan-san the medicine, which I'd wrapped in a small piece of paper.
これは
It's medicine to suppress the fury bloodlust. I went back to my house today and found instructions for how to make it. It should make the pain go away, at least for a little while. He looked down at the paper I handed him, then back to me. Sanan-san bit his lip coyly before looking into my eyes.
お返しします。気持ちはありがたいですが、私には必要ありません。
Huh? Wait, but without it, you...
我々の吸血衝動は薬などで抑えられるものではありません。抑えれば抑えるほど苦しみは増し、正気を削られていくだけ。こんな薬は気休めでしかありません。
But...
失礼。これから市中を見回ってまいりますので、これで。
Before I could protest, he was gone, walking briskly down the dim, open street. Without the medicine, what would Sanan-san do when the bloodlust came? To not only acknowledge but accept this insatiable craving as a part of one's life seemed beyond me. Oh no. I remembered what Kimigiku had said to us back at the Fushimi Magistrate's office.
では、あなたたち新選組の羅刹が見回りと称して辻斬りをしているのはご存知ですか?
No. It couldn't be. It was the Shinsengumi's job to protect Kyo and its citizens. Surely Sana-san wouldn't attack people on the street just to satisfy his thirst for blood.
千鶴、俺はその薬飲むよ。くれるか?
Hi, of course. They handed him the packet Sanan-san had so recently refused. He stuffed it into his pocket as he started off down the street as Sanan-san was rapidly retreating back.
今日は俺も見回りについていく。もし三男さんがおかしな真似をしようとしたら、全力で止めるから心配すんなよ。
All right, I'm counting on you, Heisuke. Oh, right. Where's Hijikata-san? Is he back yet?
いや、夕方頃に戻ってきたはずだけど、ずっと部屋にこもりっきりだぜ。
That's weird. Oh. I'm going to go check on him then. Heisuke and I said our quick goodbyes, and I made my way to the Kama Inn and up to Hijikata-san's room. I was hoping that the wave of anxiety I was feeling was a needless one, but... I had a very bad feeling about something as I called out to him from behind the sliding door. Hijikata-san, are you there? I've got something for you. Nothing. I was about to turn away, assuming he was asleep, when... The suppressed voice was clearly in pain. Hijikata-san? I'm coming in! I slit the door open and ran into the room. He was bent over on top of his desk at the back of the room. Sweat poured down his face, and I could hear his teeth squeak horribly as he gritted them. He looked... Hijikata-san, are you okay? I rushed over by his side.
バカ野郎。大声を出すんじゃねえ。
But...
こんなもんすぐ収まるに決まってんじゃねえか。くだらねえことで騒ぎ立てるな。
He wrapped his arms around his shoulders and squeezed until his knuckles turned white as he glared up at me. His breath came in pants and he shivered violently. It was Hijikata-san's personality to refuse to show any pain or even any emotion at all, or at least to show as little as possible. For him to be like this... The pain must have been unimaginable. Was this the bloodlust that Heisuke had spoken of? What was I supposed to do? If he drank the medicine my father had created, then the pain would likely go away, but Sanan-san had said it would only be a temporary solution. Then, should I give him some of my blood? Would Hijikata-san even want me to give him my blood? What was I going to do? Well, as we have learned from all the other ones, we gotta give him my blood. There was no time to waste. It wasn't the best plan, perhaps, but I couldn't bear to see him in pain any longer. And besides, at long last I would finally be useful. That's not a way to see yourself, Chizuru! Hijikata-san shook fiercely, and I could only gaze in horror as I imagined how unbearable the pain was. I said nothing and drew the kodachi I kept at my waist. I slid my fingers along the edge of the blade, which I barely felt. A bead of thick blood formed over the cut. Please, drink my blood. It'll make you feel better, right? His clothes were drenched in sweat, and he shook like a leaf being swept by the wind. This was it. I couldn't back down. This was my chance to do something for him, to make a difference. But perhaps most importantly, I just couldn't watch him suffer anymore. Don't worry about me. Please. I begged him desperately as I offered him my fingers oozing out with blood. Though he tried to resist, his eyes were drawn to my finger, to the thick red blood that slowly beaded and dropped. He balled his fist tightly, but he couldn't resist. Then he licked the blood from my finger. I felt the soft caress of his tongue as it ran the length of the cut. Then, the soft pressure of his teeth and lips as he sucked gently, drawing a few more drops out and into his mouth. I'll be fine. I'm a demon. I'll heal really fast. His breathing had already begun to calm itself. Through his hand on my wrist, I could feel his shaking subsiding as well. At last, I thought, I was able to be useful. A few moments later, his hand slipped from my wrist. The cut on my finger had already healed. The split in the flesh began to seal before my eyes, and I stood quietly as Hijikata-san winced. I'm sorry for being so, forward. I bowed to him. He took a quiet breath and shook his head. A sense of calm seemed to emerge from him. Absently, I touched my fingers to the wrist Hijikata-san had taken when he drank my blood. A peculiar feeling lingered on the surface of my skin. It was almost as though I could still feel his warmth there. I think that's a good place to stop. We're not at the end of chapter 1, but it's really close. Save. Save. Does it load? Yes, it does. Whew. Alright. Well, as we go to the title screen. Holy shit, okay. Stretchy, stretchy. Right. So tomorrow we may or may not resume Edo Blossom. Depends how I feel. But tonight and tomorrow night at 9 p.m. EST, we are doing some art stream. And we have another victim for the tuxedo experiment where I practice drawing clothes and put one of my own characters in said outfit. You'll get to see who that is tonight. And we might do another scene to animate after that when our hour of fun time is up. So, with that, I guess it's time to go. Goodbye, have a nice night. I'll see you at 9 p.m. if you so want to. See you then.